Imagine a woman who arrived in a foreign country as an unwanted German princess. She was married off to a future emperor who turned out to be a drunk and impotent. For 18 years, she endured humiliation and contempt from her husband. Then she gathered an army, overthrew him, and became the most powerful woman in the world. 8 days after the coup, her husband was found dead under mysterious circumstances. The official version stated he died from hemorrhoids. Nobody believed it. Over the next 34 years, she would transform Russia into the greatest empire in Europe. She would have 22 lovers, some of whom would become kings and generals. Her enemies would call her a nymphomaniac. Her people would call her the Great. This is the story of Catherine II, a woman who rewrote the rules in a world where only men wrote the rules. And today, you'll learn the truth about her life that they don't teach in history class. On May 2nd, 1729, in the Prussian city of Stettin, a girl was born named Sophie Auguste Friederike von Anhalt-Zerbst. Her family belonged to impoverished German aristocracy that had a grand name but virtually no money. Her mother was an ambitious woman who understood that her daughter's only chance for a decent life lay in an advantageous marriage. In 1744, when Sophie was 14, her mother received an invitation to the court of Russian Empress Elizabeth Petrovna. The Empress was looking for a bride for her nephew and heir, Grand Duke Peter. When Sophie arrived in Russia, she made such a favorable impression with her intelligence and charm that she was chosen immediately. Sophie understood this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Instead of clinging to her German roots, she did something remarkable. She began becoming Russian. She embraced Orthodox Christianity with genuine fervor, took the name Catherine Alexeyevna, and threw herself into studying the Russian language so intensely that she once fell ill from overwork. She did everything possible to show she was no longer German Princess Sophie, but Russian Grand Duchess Catherine. But there was one catastrophic problem: her fiancé. Grand Duke Peter Fyodorovich was the grandson of Peter the Great, but he inherited perhaps only the name. The 17-year-old was infantile, crude, and ignorant. He openly despised Russia and worshipped Prussia. While Catherine studied philosophy and Russian literature, Peter played with toy soldiers and conducted military drills among his servants in the middle of the night. He drank excessively and showed complete disinterest in state affairs. But worst of all was his physical inadequacy. When their wedding took place in 1745, Catherine was 16 and Peter 17. The first wedding night ended with nothing, and the second. Months passed, years went by, but the marriage was never consummated. Catherine would later write in her memoirs that her husband was physically incapable of marital relations. For Catherine, this was catastrophic. Her entire value at court lay in producing an heir to the throne. Without a child, she was useless. Empress Elizabeth was losing patience. Courtiers were gossiping, and Catherine understood that if the situation didn't change, she would be sent back to Germany in disgrace. But instead of despairing, Catherine began to learn. While Peter indulged in entertainment, she spent long hours reading Enlightenment philosophers like Voltaire, Montesquieu, and Diderot. She studied the history of great empires, biographies of outstanding rulers, treatises on politics and power. She observed court intrigues, memorizing who held real influence and who might be useful in the future. Catherine was preparing herself. She understood that knowledge and connections would one day become her main weapon. She also realized that if she wanted to survive, she would have to find a way to bear a child, even if her husband couldn't help her. And then, a person appeared in her life who would change everything. By 1752, the situation had reached crisis point. Catherine had been married 7 years, but was still childless. There were open discussions about annulling the marriage and sending her back to Germany. Her position hung by a thread. It was then that Sergei Saltykov appeared at court, a young and attractive guards officer. Historians still debate whether their meeting was accidental or arranged. Some believe Empress Elizabeth herself facilitated their relationship, understanding that if Peter couldn't provide an heir, Someone had to do it for the dynasty's sake. Saltykov was everything Peter wasn't. He was charming, confident, physically attractive. Catherine, who had been deprived of normal male attention for years, fell in love for the first time. Their romance was passionate, but extremely dangerous. In 1754, Catherine became pregnant. On September 20th, she gave birth to a boy named Paul. Empress Elizabeth immediately took the child away. Officially, Paul was Peter's son and the legitimate heir. But Catherine herself later hinted that Paul's real father was Saltykov. This means the future Emperor of Russia was possibly the illegitimate son of a lover, not a legitimate descendant of the Romanov dynasty. After Paul's birth, Saltykov was quickly sent abroad on a diplomatic mission. Catherine was alone again, but her position was more secure. She had fulfilled her function and produced an heir. Soon, another man appeared in her life, Stanislaw Poniatowski, a Polish aristocrat and diplomat who became a true intellectual partner. Their relationship lasted several years, and in 1757, Catherine gave birth to a daughter, Anna, who many believed was Poniatowski's child. The girl died in infancy, but Catherine's connection with Poniatowski would have long-term consequences. When Catherine became empress, she didn't forget her former lover. In 1763, using Russia's influence and 2.5 million rubles, she helped Poniatowski become King of Poland. It was a brilliant political move. Poland became a puppet state under Russian control, governed by a man personally devoted to Catherine. She demonstrated what would become her signature style, turning personal relationships into political instruments. But her next lover would play the most crucial role. He would help her seize the throne, and possibly help her eliminate her husband forever. On January 5th, 1762, Empress Elizabeth died, and Peter became Emperor Peter III. Catherine became Empress Consort. But instead of triumph, this began the most dangerous period of her life. Peter as emperor was even worse than Peter as Grand Duke. In 6 months, he managed to turn virtually every influential group against him. His first decision was to end Russia's participation in the 7 Years' War. Russian troops had captured Berlin and were close to victory over Prussia. But Peter, who worshipped Prussian King Frederick, simply returned all conquered territories without conditions. This was perceived as betrayal. The military was furious, the nobility shocked, the people bewildered. Peter didn't stop there. He introduced reforms that insulted the Orthodox Church. He publicly humiliated Catherine at court. He openly discussed divorcing her and marrying his mistress. Catherine understood her position was catastrophic. Divorce meant not just losing her title, but possibly exile, confinement to a monastery, or death. She had an ally. Grigory Orlov was a guards officer, war hero, and charismatic man who wielded enormous influence among the military. He was in love with Catherine. Their romance began around 1760, and Orlov had 4 brothers, all serving in the guards. This made the Orlov family incredibly valuable allies. In spring 1762, Catherine and Grigory Orlov began planning a coup. They secretly gathered supporters among military officers outraged by Peter's policies. Catherine promised to restore Russia's honor and rule in the country's interests. Gradually, conspirators formed around her, ready to risk their lives. On the night of July 8, 1762, everything changed. One conspirator had been arrested, threatening to reveal the entire plan under torture. There was no more time. They had to act immediately. At dawn on July 9th, Catherine rushed to the Izmailovsky Regiment barracks. She appeared before the soldiers and delivered a speech that changed Russian history. She spoke about how Peter had betrayed the country, sold out to Prussia, and was destroying everything his grandfather Peter the Great had built. The soldiers sided with her. More troops joined at other barracks. By noon, an army stood behind her. Catherine was proclaimed Empress Catherine II at the Winter Palace. And where was Peter? He was at his country residence, completely unaware of the coup. When he returned to his palace and found it empty, he panicked. He tried fleeing to Kronstadt Naval Base, but the fleet's cannons opened fire with warning shots. The commander shouted they no longer recognized Peter as emperor. Even St. Petersburg's common people came to the shore with sticks and stones to prevent the deposed emperor from returning. Peter was defeated without a single battle. 24 hours later, he surrendered. On June 28, 1762, Peter signed his abdication. His reign lasted exactly 186 days. He was arrested and sent to Ropshaw, a country estate outside St. Petersburg. The coup was complete. Catherine became autocrat of all Russia, but 8 days later, Peter was dead. On July 17, 1762, just 8 days after abdication, former Emperor Peter died at Ropshaw under circumstances that remain mysterious. The official announcement stated he died from hemorrhoidal colic and apoplectic stroke. Hemorrhoids and a stroke. This version was met with skepticism throughout Europe. Voltaire and other prominent minds openly ridiculed it. Everyone understood what really happened. Peter had been murdered. There are several versions of how it happened. One claims he was strangled with a scarf during a drunken quarrel. Another says he was suffocated with a mattress but resisted, then strangled by hand. Most historians agree on one thing. The killer was Alexei Orlov, younger brother of Catherine's lover Grigory Orlov. But here's what's important. None of those involved were ever punished. Alexei Orlov continued serving at court, received awards and honors, became a count and admiral. If Catherine had truly been shocked by her husband's murder, would she have allowed the killer to prosper? This tacit approval speaks volumes. Catherine either ordered Peter killed or made clear she wouldn't object if he disappeared. A living Peter posed enormous danger. He could rally discontented people, become a banner for rebels, be freed and returned to the throne. But a dead Peter was no longer a threat. Throughout Europe, rumors spread that the new Russian empress had come to power through murder. Her reputation was tarnished from the beginning. This shadow would haunt Catherine her entire life. Every time someone challenged her power, everyone remembered what happened to her husband. But Catherine didn't let the scandal break her. On September 22, 1762, she was crowned in Moscow's Assumption Cathedral as Catherine II, autocrat of all Russia. She was 33 years old, sole ruler of the world's largest empire, and she wasn't going to share this power with anyone. After coronation, many expected Catherine to remarry, but she was too smart for that trap. She understood that marrying would make her husband emperor, and she'd be in the shadows again. She had endured 18 years of humiliating marriage, overthrown her husband, and risked her life for power. She wouldn't give it to any man simply because traditions demanded it. Instead, Catherine created a system that was simultaneously brilliant and scandalous. She didn't marry, but she had lovers. Officially called favorites, this system allowed her to enjoy male companionship, receive emotional support, and use them for political purposes while maintaining absolute power in her hands alone. Catherine did exactly what kings had done for centuries. French kings had mistresses who received titles and wealth. English monarchs had favorites who became ministers. Spanish and Austrian emperors openly kept mistresses at court. But when a woman did the same, it caused scandal. Grigory Orlov became her first official favorite. He had helped seize power, and she rewarded him generously. Orlov received the title of Count, enormous fortune, a palace in St. Petersburg, and the legendary Orlov diamond weighing 189 carats. Their relationship continued about 10 years, and Orlov was one of the empire's most influential people. But gradually, it became clear that Orlov, despite his merits as military man and lover, was useless in politics. The relationship finally collapsed when Catherine discovered Orlov was cheating on her with young court ladies. In 1772, Orlov was sent into honorable exile abroad with a generous severance package. After Orlov came a brief romance with Alexander Vasilchikov, whom Catherine herself described as boring. She realized mere physical attractiveness wasn't enough. Catherine needed a partner who could understand her, challenge her, share her ambitions. Then, in 1774, a man appeared who would become the greatest love of her life and most important political ally. His name was Grigory Alexandrovich Potemkin. Grigory Potemkin was unlike any of Catherine's previous lovers. He had lost an eye in youth during a drunken brawl, giving his appearance wild attractiveness. He was a tall, powerful man with unpredictable temperament and sharp mind. He could work 20 hours straight, developing grandiose plans, then lie in bed for weeks refusing to see anyone. He was deeply religious, yet prone to debauchery. But this complexity made him so attractive to Catherine. For the first time, she met a man truly interesting to her intellectually, emotionally, spiritually. They could spend hours discussing politics, philosophy, art. They argued, agreed, challenged each other. Potemkin wasn't afraid of Catherine like everyone else at court. He could openly disagree, criticize her decisions, insist on his viewpoint. Catherine, instead of being offended, admired this courage. She called him her twin soul, her golden pheasant, her friend and beloved. Their correspondence, preserved to this day, is striking in passion and frankness. Catherine wrote letters full of love and desire. In one, she admits loving him so much that when he's near, she doesn't care about the rest of the world. In another, she calls herself his wife and writes about being bound by holy matrimony bonds. Did they really secretly marry? Some historians believe so. Catherine mentions several times being bound by marriage concluded 2 years ago. Potemkin sometimes calls her his wife. Perhaps they conducted a secret wedding ceremony, or perhaps it was romantic metaphor expressing their connection's depth. But regardless, their partnership was real in every sense. Potemkin became de facto co-ruler of Russia. Catherine gave him unprecedented power. He headed the military ministry, became imperial council member, received control over huge southern territories called New Russia. Potemkin wasn't just the Empress's lover. He was brilliant administrator, military strategist, and visionary politician. Under his leadership, Russia conquered Crimea, one of that century's greatest geopolitical achievements. He built the Black Sea Fleet from scratch. He founded many new southern cities, including Kherson, Nikolaev, and Sevastopol. Their romantic relationship as lovers lasted about 2 years, but their political and emotional partnership continued until Potemkin's death. Even when their sexual connection ended, they remained closest friends and allies. Moreover, Potemkin himself began selecting new favorites for Catherine. Catherine even had an official checking system for potential favorites. Countess Praskovia Bruce, her close friend, was appointed l'éprouveuse, or the tester. Every young man considered as potential favorite had to first spend a night with Countess Bruce. She evaluated his physical abilities, checked for venereal diseases, and reported results to the Empress. Over her reign, Catherine had about 22 official favorites. Some relationships lasted years, others just months. But all had one thing in common. Catherine was incredibly generous to former lovers. When relationships ended, the favorite received generous parting gifts. Someone got a palace, someone huge monetary reward, someone thousands of serfs. Stanislaw Poniatowski received an entire country. This generosity was political wisdom. By rewarding former lovers, Catherine guaranteed their loyalty and silence. They didn't become enemies, didn't spread gossip, didn't try revenge. They remained grateful allies. Catherine's last favorite was Prince Platon Zubov. When their relationship began in 1789, he was 22 and Catherine 60. The 38-year age difference shocked even the accustomed court. But Catherine enjoyed the company of a young, energetic man. Yet even then, with a new young favorite, Catherine continued writing letters to Potemkin. He remained her closest friend, main advisor, the person she trusted most. When Potemkin died of fever in 1791 at 52, Catherine was devastated. His last words were addressed to Catherine. "Forgive me, merciful Mother Sovereign." When news reached St. Petersburg, Catherine locked herself in her chambers for days in tears. She wrote a friend confessing she felt as if she'd lost part of herself. She called Potemkin her pupil, her friend, almost her idol. Catherine never fully recovered from this loss. Potemkin was the only person truly her equal, who understood her completely. After his death, she continued ruling 5 more years, but something inside her broke. On November 17, 1796, at 67, Empress Catherine II died of massive stroke in the Winter Palace. She had ruled Russia 34 years, longer than any other woman in the country's history. During those years, she transformed Russia from a relatively backward Eastern European power into one of the world's greatest empires. Under Catherine, Russia's territory increased by over 520,000 square kilometers. She annexed Crimea, significant parts of Poland, lands in the Caucasus and Black Sea region. She founded more than 140 new cities and carried out large-scale education reforms. She built the Hermitage, one of the world's greatest museums, assembling an incredible art collection. Catherine corresponded with the greatest minds of her time, including Voltaire, Diderot, and D'Alembert. She invited philosophers and artists to Russia, patronized sciences and arts. This was the time historians call the Golden Age of the Russian Empire. But what did people remember after her death? Not her state achievements, not the empire's expansion, not the cultural flourishing. People remembered her lovers, her sexual scandals, and the most disgusting legend that haunts her name to this day, that Catherine the Great died during a sexual act with a horse. This story has absolutely no basis in reality. Medical records, eyewitness accounts, official documents all confirm Catherine died of a stroke in her bed, surrounded by courtiers and doctors. No horses, no indecent circumstances. This was an ordinary death of an elderly woman from a common disease. But the legend spread throughout Europe and lives on today, over 200 years after her death. Where did it come from? It was created and spread by Catherine's enemies, primarily French royalists, who hated her for supporting Enlightenment ideas and daring to be a strong woman with power. There were other dirty legends, too. Tales of a secret palace room filled with erotic furniture with phallic legs. Claims she was a nymphomaniac who couldn't go a day without sex with several men. All lies, gossip, slander. Why were these legends so enduring? Because the world couldn't forgive Catherine one simple fact. She was a woman with absolute power. She overthrew her husband, possibly ordered his murder. She ruled alone, without a husband or co-ruler. She took lovers of her choosing and changed them when she wanted. She refused to play by society's rules for women. In a world where male kings had dozens of mistresses without judgment, a woman doing the same was perceived as a monster. Louis XV of France openly kept many mistresses, including the famous Madame de Pompadour, and this was considered normal. Charles II of England had so many illegitimate children, their exact number is unknown, yet he was a popular king. But when a woman displayed the same sexual freedom, she was declared degenerate. This was patriarchal society's revenge on a woman who dared take what traditionally belonged only to men. If they couldn't defeat her during life, they tried destroying her reputation after death. And to some extent, they succeeded. Even today, many hearing Catherine the Great's name first think of scandalous legends rather than real achievements. But Catherine's real story is far more interesting and important than any fabrications. This is the story of a foreign girl nobody took seriously who became the greatest ruler of her time. A woman who survived a toxic marriage, dangerous palace intrigues, in a society that didn't want women on thrones. This is the story of a leader who seized power through determination and courage and held it through intellect and political wisdom. A reformer who tried changing a huge backward country despite conservative aristocracy's resistance. A patron of arts who transformed St. Petersburg into one of Europe's cultural centers. And yes, this is also the story of a woman who loved passionately and openly, who wasn't ashamed of her desires and didn't apologize for her feelings. In an era when women were expected to be silent and submissive, she spoke and ruled. In a world where female sexuality was supposed to be suppressed and hidden, she openly chose lovers and enjoyed intimacy. Catherine once wrote that her heart couldn't remain without love even for 1 hour. This wasn't weakness, it was an assertion of her humanity. She was an empress, but also a woman with emotions, desires, needs. She refused to choose between power and love. She wanted both, and she took both. Her son Paul, that boy possibly Saltykov's illegitimate son, hated his mother from childhood. When she died and Paul became emperor, one of his first acts was ordering Peter III's body exhumed and reburied with full imperial honors in Peter and Paul Cathedral next to Catherine. This was revenge. Paul wanted to humiliate his mother even after death, forcing her to lie eternally next to the husband she'd betrayed and possibly murdered. He wanted to remind the world Catherine was a usurper, murderer, illegitimate ruler. But history judged differently. Paul ruled only 5 years before being murdered in a conspiracy by his own courtiers. He's remembered as a paranoid tyrant, if remembered at all. Peter III was so insignificant, his name became synonymous with failure and traitor in Russian history. And Catherine is remembered as the Great. Not Catherine the scandalous, not Catherine the degenerate, not Catherine the murderer, the Great. Because despite all gossip, despite all slander, despite all attempts to blacken her name, history recognized her greatness. She expanded the empire. She modernized the country. She transformed Russia into a great power. She ruled 34 years, and those years became some of the most glorious in Russian history. And perhaps most importantly, she showed that a woman could be just as strong, intelligent, and successful a ruler as any man. She didn't ask permission. She didn't apologize for her strength. She simply took power and used it. Her life is a lesson for all of us, a lesson that greatness doesn't depend on gender, that power belongs to those brave enough to take it, that a woman can be simultaneously strong and passionate, powerful and loving, cruel and generous. A lesson that rules are created by winners, but legends are written by the envious, and that true greatness outlives any slander. Catherine the Great changed Russia forever. She changed perceptions of what a woman in power could do, and her legacy lives on today, more than 200 years after her death, because greatness is what remains when gossip dies, and her greatness outlived all her enemies, all the legends, all the slander. She was Catherine the Great, and history will never forget her.